In December 1999, the city of Great Falls, Montana, was about to uncover one of the most disturbing cases in its history. It all started with what seemed like a routine police search, a man under investigation for impersonating an officer. But what the officers found inside his home went far beyond fake badges and uniforms. The evidence they stumbled upon hinted at something much darker, something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, the man at the center of it all, had managed to live unnoticed for years. He blended into society, hiding behind an unassuming appearance. But as investigators dug deeper into his past, they began to realize that this wasn't just a case of identity fraud. This was something much worse. The discoveries made that day would leave a lasting scar on the community. How could someone with such a deeply disturbing history continue to evade justice? How had the warning signs been ignored for so long? And most importantly, what had really happened behind the closed doors of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah's home? This case would take investigators on a journey through a lifetime of dark secrets, missed opportunities, and crimes so horrific that they were almost impossible to comprehend. It wasn't just about one man's actions. It was about a system that had failed to stop him. To understand the full extent of what had been uncovered, we have to go back to the beginning. Back to where it all started, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah's childhood, a time when the signs of his disturbing nature first began to show. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was born as David Paul Brown on February 15, 1957, in Worcester, Massachusetts. At first glance, he seemed like any other child. He had a home, parents, and what appeared to be a normal upbringing. But from the very beginning, there were signs that something wasn't right. As an infant, Nathaniel was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition where excess fluid builds up in the brain, putting pressure on it. Doctors managed to treat it, but the long-term effects of the condition were never fully understood. Some believe it may have contributed to his unusual behavior as he grew older. Even after recovering physically, something about Nathaniel's development seemed off. His emotions, reactions, and social behavior didn't align with those of other children his age. By the time he was a toddler, his actions were already concerning. He would pick at his skin until it bled and then chew on the wounds. His parents dismissed it as an odd habit, assuming he would outgrow it. But instead of stopping, his behaviors only became more disturbing. As he got older, his interactions with other children raised even more red flags. He didn't just play rough, he hurt people. At the age of 7, Nathaniel lured a 5-year-old girl into his family's basement. What seemed like an innocent invitation turned violent when he attempted to strangle her. The only reason she survived was because his mother happened to hear the commotion and intervened just in time. But rather than taking serious action, his family brushed it off. No police report, no psychiatric help, just a punishment at home and a warning not to do it again. His mother, Tyra Brown, believed in strict discipline but seemed unwilling to acknowledge that her son's actions were far from normal. Nathaniel's father, Philip Brown, tried to control him through physical punishment, but it did little to change his behavior. Instead, Nathaniel became more defiant, more aggressive. The signs were there, clear as day, yet no one stepped in to stop him. As the years passed, Nathaniel's troubling tendencies only worsened. His violent thoughts weren't just ideas, they were slowly turning into actions. And the more he got away with, the more confident he became that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. What started as strange childhood behaviors was turning into something far more dangerous. And no one, not his parents, not his teachers, not the authorities, did anything to stop it. As he grew older, his violent impulses became more calculated. He no longer acted on impulse, he planned. At 12 years old, he lured a 6-year-old boy to a secluded area, pretending he had something fun to show him. But once they were alone, he attacked the boy. The crime went unreported, allowing Nathaniel to continue his pattern of targeting younger children without fear of punishment. His aggression wasn't limited to strangers. Even in school, teachers noticed his disturbing behavior. He would follow younger students, stare at them for uncomfortably long periods, and sometimes even whisper unsettling things. But when complaints were made, they were often ignored. His behavior was chalked up to acting out, rather than a sign of something far more dangerous. By 17, Nathaniel was no longer just hurting children, he was attempting to take them. One day, he set his sights on two young boys from his neighborhood. He lured them into a cemetery, promising something exciting. The boys, unaware of his true intentions, followed. But once they were inside, something felt off. Nathaniel's demeanor changed. The boys sensed danger, and one of them, trusting his instincts, and managed to escape. The other wasn't as lucky. Nathaniel attacked him, inflicting serious harm before eventually letting him go. Once again, no legal action was taken. The parents of the boys didn't press charges, believing that Nathaniel was simply troubled, rather than truly dangerous. The justice system failed to intervene, and Nathaniel was allowed to continue his life as if nothing had happened. Each time he committed an act of violence, he learned a valuable lesson, not about guilt or remorse, but about how easy it was to get away with it. No one was stopping him, and that only fueled his confidence to go further. The warning signs were all there, but no one took them seriously. And because of that, his crimes would soon reach a level of horror that no one could have imagined. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah's crimes were no longer just violent outbursts. They had turned into carefully planned acts. By that time, he wasn't just harming children. He was actively luring them away, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to do it. One of his most shocking crimes happened in 1974. Nathaniel dressed as a police officer, complete with a fake badge and uniform. Posing as law enforcement, he approached an 8-year-old boy named Richard O'Connor, making it seem as if he was there to help him. But instead of taking the boy to safety, Nathaniel abducted him and held him captive for hours, inflicting severe harm. It wasn't until a neighbor noticed something suspicious and called the authorities that Nathaniel was finally caught. But despite the horrifying nature of his crime, the punishment he received was shockingly lenient: probation. No prison time, no real consequences. He had kidnapped a child while pretending to be a police officer, and yet he walked free. This lack of punishment only reinforced what he had learned throughout his life. He could get away with anything. In 1977, just a few years later, Nathaniel escalated once again. This time, he targeted two boys in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Using the same tactic of impersonating a police officer, he convinced the boys to come with him. Once he had them alone, his true intentions became clear. Nathaniel restrained both boys and subjected them to extreme physical harm. At one point, he attempted to break one of the boys' ribs by jumping on his chest. The other boy, in a desperate attempt to survive, pretended to be unconscious, hoping Nathaniel would lose interest. Eventually, Nathaniel left one of the boys on the side of the road and drove off with the other in his trunk. This time, he was caught, and this time, he was actually sent to prison. The court sentenced him to 18 to 20 years, a punishment that seemed appropriate given the severity of his crimes. But even prison wasn't enough to stop him. While incarcerated, he continued to talk openly about his dark fantasies to mental health professionals. He didn't show remorse. He spoke as if his actions were normal. His disturbing conversations were enough to have him transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital, a facility for those deemed too dangerous for standard imprisonment. Doctors and psychologists repeatedly warned that he was a serious threat, that he should never be released. But the justice system didn't listen. In 1984, after serving less than a decade, Nathaniel was granted parole. He was deemed rehabilitated and allowed to walk free. It was a decision that would have devastating consequences, because once he was out, he didn't just pick up where he left off. His crimes became even more horrifying. After his early release from prison in 1984, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah wasted no time in reinventing himself. He legally changed his name from David Paul Brown to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah. When asked about the change, he claimed he wanted to experience what it was like to be discriminated against. In reality, the new identity helped him distance himself from his past crimes, making it easier to blend into society. By 1991, he had moved to Great Falls, Montana, to live with his mother. To his neighbors, he appeared like any other middle-aged man. He was overweight, quiet, and often seen around the neighborhood. No one suspected that they were living next to a man with a history of violent crimes against children. But it wasn't long before his old habits resurfaced. That same year, Nathaniel was caught outside a post office attempting to abduct a young boy. Once again, he was using his favorite trick, pretending to be a police officer. A concerned mother, sensing that something was wrong, stepped in and prevented her child from going with him. The police were called, and Nathaniel was arrested. This should have been a turning point. Given his criminal history, this was the perfect opportunity for authorities to finally put him away for good. But instead, he was given probation. A repeat offender with a clear history of targeting children was once again allowed to walk free. For the next several years, Nathaniel kept a low profile. He didn't stop his predatory behavior, he just got better at hiding it. He avoided drawing too much attention to himself and became an expert at blending in. He started gaining the trust of local families, sometimes even offering to babysit children in the neighborhood. Behind closed doors, however, he was still the same predator he had always been. He kept detailed journals filled with disturbing thoughts. He was obsessed over the idea of capturing children. And worst of all, he was still looking for his next victim. For a long time, Nathaniel was able to fly under the radar. No one suspected him of anything, and his name never made headlines. But that was all about to change. On the morning of February 6, 1996, 10-year-old Zachary Ramsey left his home in Great Falls, Montana, like he did every day. He was dressed in a blue denim jacket, a blue football jersey with his name on it, and black high-top sneakers. His destination was Whittier Elementary School, just a short walk away. But that morning, something went terribly wrong. Zach never made it to school. Somewhere along his usual route, he vanished without a trace. As news of his disappearance spread, the community came together in a desperate search. Friends, family, and local authorities scoured the area, hoping to find any sign of him. But there were no immediate answers, just growing concern that something terrible had happened. Then, witnesses began coming forward with disturbing accounts. Several people recalled seeing a man following Zach as he walked through an alleyway near his school. The man was described as overweight, wearing a dark blue coat similar to a police uniform. One witness reported seeing an off-white four-door car idling near the alleyway just before Zach disappeared. The details were alarming. They painted a picture of a child being watched, followed, and possibly taken right off the street in broad daylight. As investigators pieced together the timeline, another chilling discovery was made. A jacket and a pair of jeans were found in a nearby dumpster. The clothing matched what Zach had been wearing that morning. This raised even more questions. Has someone taken him and discarded his belongings? Or was this meant to confuse investigators? With each clue, suspicion grew. And soon, one name kept coming up: Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. Nathaniel had already been on law enforcement's radar for his disturbing past. He had a history of impersonating a police officer, attempting to abduct children, and committing violent crimes. And now, multiple witnesses placed him near the scene of Zach's disappearance. For investigators, it was impossible to ignore the pattern. Nathaniel had a history of targeting young boys. He had a habit of luring them away using deception. And he was known to be in the same area at the time Zach vanished. The case against him was building, but there was still one major problem. There was no physical evidence linking him directly to Zach's disappearance. No eyewitness had seen Nathaniel physically take the boy, and without that, there wasn't enough to make an arrest. But detectives weren't ready to give up. They knew they needed more proof, something that could tie Nathaniel directly to the crime. For nearly 3 years after Zachary Ramsey's disappearance, there were no solid leads, only suspicions. The case remained open, but without physical evidence, authorities couldn't make an arrest. Then, in December 1999, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was arrested again. This time, it wasn't for a major crime. It was for impersonating a police officer outside a local elementary school. For investigators, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. With Nathaniel now in custody, they finally obtained a search warrant for his home. What they found inside was worse than anything they could have imagined. The first thing that caught their attention was a pull string hanging from the kitchen ceiling. It seemed out of place, and officers couldn't understand why it was there. But that was only the beginning of the disturbing discoveries. In one of the kitchen drawers, they found a notebook that appeared to be a personal cookbook. But these weren't normal recipes. The titles were cryptic and deeply unsettling. Some of them included names that investigators recognized as missing children. At first, it wasn't clear what the writings meant. But as they read through the pages, a horrifying possibility began to emerge. Investigators also uncovered over 3,500 photographs of children. Some of them were developed while others were still on undeveloped film. Many of the children were unidentified, but some were known to have been in contact with Nathaniel at some point. Then they found something even more alarming, a list of names. It appeared to be a record of specific children Nathaniel had taken an interest in. And one name stood out, Zachary Ramsey. Next to Zach's name was a single word, died. This was the closest thing to a confession they had seen. But the discoveries didn't stop there. Tucked away in Nathaniel's kitchen was a meat grinder. Inside it, investigators found strands of human hair. While DNA testing later revealed that the hair did not belong to Zach, its presence raised a terrifying question. Whose hair was it? As they continued searching, police found small bone fragments, though they were too degraded to be linked to a specific person. This added to the growing fear that something truly horrific had been happening behind closed doors. When investigators spoke to Nathaniel's neighbors, they heard even more disturbing accounts. Several people recalled that Nathaniel frequently hosted cookouts. He often served meat that he claimed was venison, something he had personally hunted. But there was a problem. Nathaniel didn't have a hunting license, nor had anyone ever seen him go hunting. Some neighbors admitted that the meat had tasted strange, different from anything they had eaten before. At the time, they thought little of it. But in light of what investigators had just found inside his home, a horrifying theory began to take shape. Had Nathaniel Bar-Jonah been serving human remains to his neighbors? With every new discovery, the case against him became stronger. But the biggest question still remained: what had really happened to Zachary Ramsey? And was it too late to bring him justice? With the disturbing discoveries inside Nathaniel Bar-Jonah's home, investigators believed they finally had enough evidence to charge him in connection with Zachary Ramsey's disappearance. Witnesses had placed him near the alley where Zach was last seen. His so-called cookbook contained references to missing children, and his home held disturbing items that hinted at something far darker. But there was still one major problem. There was no physical evidence proving that Nathaniel had harmed Zach. Despite everything, Zachary's remains had never been found. Authorities pushed forward, confident that the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. However, Zach's mother, Rachel Howard, complicated the case in an unexpected way. She refused to believe that her son was dead. Instead, she held on to the idea that Zach was still alive, possibly living in another country. A psychic had told her that Zach was safe, and she chose to believe that over the mounting evidence. Her refusal to accept Zach's death had a major impact on the legal proceedings. Without a body and without the support of the victim's own mother, prosecutors struggled to build a solid case for murder. Defense attorneys used the lack of physical proof to argue that Zach had simply run away or had been taken by someone else. Eventually, the prosecution was forced to drop the charges related to Zachary Ramsey's disappearance. It was a devastating blow for investigators who had spent years trying to bring justice to the case. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah would not be convicted for Zach's disappearance, at least not directly. However, he didn't walk free. The evidence found in his home was enough to convict him of multiple other crimes, including kidnapping and aggravated assault from previous cases. In 2002, he was sentenced to 130 years in prison. Though he had escaped conviction for Zach's case, the sentence ensured that he would never harm another child again. For many, it wasn't enough. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many crimes left unresolved. But at least, after decades of slipping through the cracks, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was finally behind bars for good. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah spent his final years in Montana State Prison, serving his 130-year sentence. Despite his conviction, he never admitted to any of his crimes. He continued to insist that he was innocent, dismissing the accusations against him as misunderstandings or fabrications. But for investigators and the families of his possible victims, the questions never stopped. How many children had he actually harmed? Was Zachary Ramsey truly one of them? And if so, where was his body? Nathaniel never provided any answers. Then, in April 2008, he was found dead in his prison cell. He had suffered from various health issues, primarily due to his severe obesity, and authorities ruled his death as natural causes. Some believed that he took the full truth of his crimes to the grave. Even in death, the mystery surrounding him remained. Though strong evidence suggested he had been responsible for multiple disappearances, many cases were never fully closed. Without bodies or undeniable proof, families were left in limbo, unsure of what had truly happened to their loved ones. The case of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah is one of the most disturbing examples of how a dangerous predator can go unchecked for years. Despite countless warning signs, multiple arrests, and clear evidence of his violent tendencies, the justice system failed to stop him. Each time he was caught, he was given another chance, another opportunity to hurt more children. And because of that, lives were lost, families were shattered, and many unanswered questions still remain. Zachary Ramsey's case is a painful reminder of how fragile justice can be. Even with mounting evidence, his disappearance was never fully solved. His mother's refusal to believe in his death, combined with the lack of physical proof, allowed Nathaniel to avoid conviction in that case. But does that mean he was innocent? Or did the legal system fail to hold him accountable once again? Stories like this highlight the importance of staying vigilant. Criminals like Nathaniel Bar-Jonah don't always look like monsters. They blend in, hiding in plain sight. This is why communities must pay attention, speak up, and take warning signs seriously before it's too late. What do you think? Could the justice system have prevented these crimes if it had acted sooner? How can we protect children from predators who manipulate and deceive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story important, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Crime Shade for more in-depth crime investigations. Your support helps bring these cases to light and raises awareness about the dangers that often go unnoticed. Stay safe, stay informed, and always trust your instincts.